Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Human Rights Watch says that Mali's military has killed dozens of people in its crackdown on extremists. Jihadist groups are also accused of ramping up violence since December. Abuses on both sides may amount to war crimes. Also, women from sub-Saharan Africa who live in Tunisia often struggle. Racism is rife, and many migrants find it hard to find a job, and if they do, often say that they're badly treated. And cannabis to go. Uganda's only licensed cannabis farm grows only for export, as use of the crop is still illegal in the country. It calls, though, for more permits to be granted to smaller scale growers. But first, Mali said that it will investigate some of the abuses from a Human Rights Watch report documenting a spike in violence by the country's army and extremist groups. Government forces have been accused of killing at least 71 civilians since December. Islamist fighters, 36. Human Rights Watch says that almost no pro-government forces have been investigated for killings that likely amount to war crimes. Abuses, including reported mass executions, have risen recently, but the country has struggled with extremist attacks since a 2012 jihadist uprising. In 2020, the country's military junta seized power in part because of the ongoing security crisis. Karine Dufka from Human Rights Watch gives us an overview of the report's findings.
Well, we interviewed dozens of witnesses and other sources who described some pretty horrific attacks. By the jihadists, there was one ambush in December on a truck of traders that overturned, caught fire, and 32 people were killed, including children and women, many of them infants, and many of them burned alive. On the side of the government, we documented reprisal attacks immediately after soldiers had been killed, as well as this terrible incident, really the worst since 2012, involving the army, in which 35 people were allegedly taken out of the Diabali camp and executed about 11 miles from that camp.
Now, both soldiers and extremists are implicated in your report, but are you at all more concerned about one side versus the other?
Well, really, all different sides, including militias, have been involved in horrific atrocities. Indeed, hundreds of people have been killed in Mali in recent years by all those three categories, government forces, armed Islamist forces, and then pro-government militias. So we're concerned about all of them, and we're particularly concerned about the lack of justice, because justice must serve and should serve as a deterrent to future abuse.
And has there been any response from the Malian government to the report?
Well, we sent them a letter, and they sent us a detailed letter in response in which they said they had already opened up, prior even to our writing them, two investigations by the gendarmes and another one by the military high command. So we welcome that. That's very good. But again, they have promised such investigations in the past, and they just have not progressed, which is very worrying.
Now, Mali's been unstable for over a decade. How have you been able to establish that things are worse now than before?
Well, it has been unstable, and again, there have always been violations. We're particularly concerned about the impact of the coup and then the transitional government, because, of course, there are numerous high-level military who are really running the show in Mali, and they are, may well be less inclined to ensure accountability for allegations involving their forces. Also, there's a lot of pressure, really, on local and international journalists and civil society to report on abuses by all sides, particularly the military.
Now, mercenaries from the Russian Wagner Group are reportedly operating in Mali. Did their fighters feature at all in your investigations?
Well, yes, they did. A number of our witnesses observed the presence of white soldiers in areas where we determine Barkhane, Takuba, or MINUSMA are not operating. So we suppose that these are Russian troops or those aligned with Wagner. They were also in areas and in places where there were some of the very serious abuses that we documented that took place. So we urge the Malians to be transparent about their involvement. And of course, these forces are operating on Malian soil, and ultimately it is the Malians who should be there and should protect and ensure accountability for all civilians and abuses against all civilians.
Karine Dufka there from Human Rights Watch. Somalia has missed the March 15th deadline to wrap up elections for the lower house of parliament. It plays a crucial role in choosing the president. Now, the mandate of current leader Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed expired last February and was controversially extended by parliament. 40 seats of the lower house are still unfilled in the states of Jubaland, Hirshabelle and Puntland. And there were more protests in Sudan on Tuesday, with many demonstrators condemning the gang rape of a woman by security forces the day before. The victim reportedly was a 19-year-old from South Sudan who hadn't taken part in the rally but was attacked after being forced off a bus. At least 87 people have been killed since a wave of protests began in the country following last October's military coup. Women from sub-Saharan Africa who live in Tunisia often struggle to be accepted. Racism is rife, and many migrants find it hard to find a job, and if they do, many say that they're often badly treated. Our correspondents tell us more.
At this Senegalese restaurant in Tunis, lunch service is the busiest for Nogaye, who serves sub-Saharan students but also Tunisian clients.
This is rice with fish, the national dish, which we eat practically every day for lunch in Senegal. Yes, definitely. You see, the food is almost finished. Every day there's a high demand.
But making a living hasn't been easy for this entrepreneur who came to Tunisia in 2013 to work as a housekeeper. It took her 3 years before she could open her restaurant.
Every time I asked for a permit, they told me I don't have the right to do business as a foreigner. In the end, I had to push for 2 years to have my rights recognized.
Nogaye now has a residency permit and managed to find investors for her business. But for many sub-Saharan migrants, it's hard to find jobs. Many work informally and have few rights. Miriam agreed to tell us her story anonymously.
If you work at someone's house, if a person tells you, you stole something, you stole a jewel, I'm calling the police, every time the police would come, they would ask for your residency permit and your work contract, and we never have a work contract.
When she finally found a job at a beauty salon, she faced racism and abuse from her employer.
She insulted us every time. She would say, you're black, you smell bad.
Miriam worked with the UN Population Fund to write a comic strip that raises awareness about the mistreatment of female migrants in Tunisia. Pearl, a student from Central Africa, says there needs to be more support for women who speak up. She's taken part in several training sessions on human trafficking.
We offer training to these migrants because most of the time they are exploited because they are not informed.
In 2018, Tunisia was one of the first Arab countries to pass a law against racism and discrimination. But until now, few sub-Saharan women have been able to assert their rights.
Well, Uganda's first cannabis farm opened in 2018, and it's just expanded into the European market. Yet, growing or consuming cannabis is illegal in Uganda itself. Only one company so far has been granted a farming permit, and it's only allowed to export its crop for medicinal use. Our correspondent tells us more.
This is the only Ugandan farm licensed to produce medical cannabis. Here, hundreds of the plant species grow on a 30,000 square meter area in a highly controlled environment.
We will harvest in the next 3 weeks, and this will be particularly going to Israel as well.
The project started after an Israeli and Ugandan partner teamed up to form the company Industrial Globus, through which they began business in 2018. The founders say that the conditions in Uganda were favorable.
Uganda being high altitude, but also at the same time at the equator. No winter, no freezing. There is no prolonged sun. So you basically have the right ingredients for this particular crop. A well-qualified human resource, well-trained, skilled, and cheap.
More than 100 employees from the region work here. For Anna, who studied agriculture in Kampala, it was her first job.
See other people I work with, they were just at home seated. So when this company came into Uganda, they got an opportunity to work with us here. They have got good homes, they have got projects from the earnings they are getting from this farm.
To this day, the planting and consumption of cannabis remains illegal for other companies and individuals. Experts question this monopoly.
We've handled about 25 applications of local and international farms that would want to have licenses to commercially produce, research, and grow marijuana. Unfortunately, none of them has been licensed yet. And if Uganda wants to achieve middle-income status economy, marijuana legalization for smallholder farmers and distribution across the value chain is the way to go.
The Industrial Globus Group exports up to 5 tons of cannabis a year, and the numbers could go even higher as demand in Europe and North America grows by the year.
And finally, a sick lioness who sparked an international rush to help her when her plight was made public 2 years ago, is now doing much better. Kandaka was one of 5 big cats who were starving to death in a zoo in Sudan. 3 survived and were moved to a reserve where they've now made a spectacular recovery.
Currently, we have 17 lions from 5 different locations, 4 of which we got from zoos, and we brought all of them here to the sanctuary. Some cubs were born here too. The first birth produced 3 cubs and the second produced 2. The lionesses that gave birth used to be in Al-Qurashi Zoo, the most famous being Kandaka and Lima. We are trying to bring back animals which are no longer found in Sudan, like elephants, giraffes, and zebras. We feel like it's very important that these species return to Sudan so the children can see these animals face to face here instead of having to travel distances abroad.
Well, that is all for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.